During this tutorial, we'll cover two view panels that relate to managing information at the level of the session. The first is tier management, the second one is session check. If we bring up tier management from the view menu, what we can see is a basic table with a few functions around the table on the right hand side and on top of the interface. So looking at the table itself, we can see that we have a function that enables us to lock data, which means that the data cannot be modified by the user anymore once it's locked, and you can see this with the little padlocks. And even if I try and click within that tier and modify the data, it's impossible. Everything is locked in there. The second column is about showing tiers, and so you can decide to hide tiers, which can be useful in the context of a working with students or working with people that should be able to see certain information but not others, other type of information. And that you display or not a tier has no impact on the actual contents of that tier. This is just a display option. It has so that even if you were to hide the orthography tier, doesn't mean that you're losing the data. It just means that the tier is not visible within the session editor. Here you have the tier name that you can modify if the tier is not one of the basic tiers of font, and here you have the 5 basic tiers in font. Word grouping is something I'll return to in a moment. For every tier you can modify the font of the tier, and you can also modify using those arrows the ordering of the tier within the session editor. That brings us to the two probably most important buttons, one of which is to create a new tier and the other one to edit the tier. So if you create a new tier, if you want to create a new tier, you can click on this button, give it a name, so my new tier, and here comes the option as to whether the tier should be grouped, or called word aligned or not. Tier grouping has to do with certain research projects that require the breakup of an utterance into smaller units, such as words or phrases. So unless you have a type of research that requires you to put labeling at those levels, let's say the word within a phrase or the phrase within a sentence or a clause, then you probably won't need to use tier grouping here. But the option is there in case people need to break up those longer utterances into smaller domains of analysis. And for every tier you create, you can set the font and the font size and a few of the typefaces there. That can help also your usage of the tier. So you create your new tier, and here the tier is not showing up because my poor computer is too busy doing recordings, and so there seems to be a delay in here. But we have created our new tier, so it's just gonna take time for the tier to display. So, oops. Okay, and now it just appeared. Okay. And that completes our description of creating new tiers in font. Moving on now to the other view panel that's available within the view menu at the session level is the session check. And the session check interface relates to the larger interface. So if you look at the bottom here, there are 5 warnings about this particular session that's open. So when you open a session, Font will perform a bunch of checks to make sure that the data formatting that you're using is not getting in the way of analyses or font queries. So, and for every time there's a potential issue with the formatting, Font will give you a warning. And so what you can do is either bring up your session check from within the view menu, or you can double click on the warnings at the bottom, which will do the same thing, open up session check, and here Font will give you a message for what could be potentially problematic. And here the flags are about font alignment, something that we will cover during a different tutorial. So session check is really not to do any concrete work in Font, but really a function that we have there so as to keep the user following certain practices in data formatting that are relevant for other functions in FON. So that completes that short tutorial about these two utilities, and I will continue in the next one by looking at the functions that relate to record data.